love to read.
Oh, thank you.
But I think one of the things that we've learned is that if 10 people buy the book off of our conversation, then 8 of those are because there's something about you that they like, as opposed to the content. Yeah, you can sort of like or hate that, but that's our experience, is that they find something about maybe your story compelling. And so maybe we could just kind of, I don't know, just ask you the first question, Adam Kingl ? And just let you say a couple of words about what you do, and how you kind of ended up being where you are, etc.
Being where I am. It was sort of a circuitous path. I began my career many years ago, many decades ago, as a theater director. That was my first career, and I don't think there's a huge difference actually in many ways between theater and teaching. And I would say the 4 words I'd use to describe myself now is I'm a teacher, I'm an author, I'm an academic, and I'm an advisor. And I've been doing that for a few decades now. When I sort of started moving my way into the world of business, it was because at first I started gravitating toward the business side of what I was seeing in the entertainment industry, that it just seemed that there were things they could be doing better, whether it was strategy, whether it was their marketing, et cetera. And for a while then, when I was working in some of those functions, and then I was consulting to the entertainment industry in that area, both in the UK and in the US. And I think I was known for a while as that person, like the advisor you bring in for media and entertainment companies. Like I was, in charge of the media club when I was doing my MBA at London Business School, et cetera. But after a while, I found a lot of the issues that these companies were facing were human issues. It was more like leadership, culture, building their innovation capacity, et cetera. And those are universal. Issues and challenges. And so I started moving more toward being a generalist and advising companies in any industry about that. And when I started going more purely into executive education in a business school context, and I was at London Business School, I was directing this program called the Emerging Leaders Program, which is made up of high potentials. These are people mainly in their late 20s.
Yeah.
Came from all over the world. And what was great is not just working with young high potentials, but the fact they were on that program meant, I think these are our leaders of the future. Their companies were spending a heck of a lot of money, which you generally don't see companies investing in, the development of people in their 20s. Not that level of investment that they were doing, send people on this 3-week program in London, shipping them from all over the world to do this program. But what the companies were sort of saying at the same time is, could you fix them? Can you do something with them, because we don't understand them? And that was the kind of interesting thing where it's like, there's something going on here. Maybe there's something a little more dramatic in the younger generation about work, life, careers, and leadership. And so I started asking some questions of them, first informally, then formally, when I started surveying them and doing, because that's generally how research begins, right? You ask yourself a question and you realize you don't have the answer to it. And if you're curious enough about it, you'll conduct some research.
Right.
And over time, then that led to my writing some articles about what I was finding, and then doing some keynote speeches about what I was finding. And then after several years, this wasn't right away. After several years, I thought, okay, I think I have enough for a book here. So that's how Next Generation Leadership came about. It was quite organic, like my career. It wasn't all planned precisely in that way. It reminds me of the Yiddish proverb, if you want to make God laugh, show him your plans. So that's sort of
right.
So that was that book. But the interesting thing is that my next book, which comes out in April, called Sparking Success, is about how companies can improve their innovation and creativity and adaptability using examples from arts organizations. So there again, I'm clearly drawing on my background. It's a very personal book because I'm saying, what can the arts teach business? So So I have found that the cliche "follow your passions" has actually served me well, though I can't necessarily map where that would take me.
Can you advocate it for others, or do you think it was a stroke of luck that the
Yeah,
tortuous path has served you well?
it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell, yeah, whether how much of that was fortune and how much of it was uh, talent, or just yeah, making the right decisions. Who knows? Who knows? Now, actually, I'm very curious too about your. So obviously, I know you're in Singapore right now, yeah.
That's right.
But you're not originally from Singapore.
No, I'm from Southern Alberta,
Ah, okay.
Canada.
And so, what was your journey?
It also was a serpentine walk. So it went Lethbridge, Alberta, which is a town of 100,000 people.
Right.
So for those who've never lived in a town like that and they'll hear this, that's the size where if you pop out to the grocery store, there's a like 90% chance you'll recognize someone. Then I went to New York to work for a business that was just getting going at that time, and it turned out to be like a real unicorn. And so really enjoyed being at the ground floor. You know, less than 100 people when we started, and 3,000 when I left.
Yeah.
And from New York to India,
Oh, wow.
Delhi, India, and then India to Hong Kong, and Hong Kong to Singapore, which is where I am now and have stayed since then. Although I should add that I spent a lot of time in the first 4 years of my time in Singapore commuting back into India and into Australia, as well as Japan and Korea and other
Oh,
places.
amazing. Yeah.
But I consider Australia a real, like, when people say like, where have you worked and done business? I list Australia, even though I never had a residential address there.
Sure.
So yeah, what a just huge privilege to be able to get to know all of those cities and people in all those cities. And yeah, it's given me a great lens on my own work, and and kind of how interesting a smorgasbord this planet is once you sort of see how people configure things like life and business and the way to get along with one another and so forth.
Yeah.
It's just been a riot. Yeah.
How long have you been in Singapore then?
16 years.
Wow. Yeah. And was it planned, or were you thought, well, I'll go
No.
for a few years? And yeah.
That's there's a few patterns that obtain for expatriates, and 2 years is a very natural period of time, 24 months.
Yeah.
Not like by calendar year, but sort of from whenever they happen to show up. If you show up in March, you can nearly set your watch that if a dozen people as expatriates show up in March, then half of that dozen will be leaving in March. A couple might have left before then.
Okay.
And then there's like an accelerator factor. It's like if you stay 3 years, the likelihood you'll stay 5 is quite high. And if you stay 5, you'll almost certainly stay 10, and so forth.
Right. Okay, I get, yeah.
I won't be in Singapore forever, but even after 16 years, I'll still maintain kind of regular presence and operations here for another 10.
Yeah, I love Singapore. I mean, I think we just missed each other actually. I was when Faraz reached out to me. I had literally was just leaving Singapore. I was there for a week.
Shame.
Yeah, yeah. He was like, he was like, hey, do you want to? We were in Singapore. But we'll do a Zoom call. It's like, well, that's a shame because I'm about to board a plane out of Singapore in like 2 hours.
Oh, we could have tantalized you to stay longer. We'd be doing this in studio lighting with a glass of Burgundy.
Oh dear, stop.
Next.
Clearly, I love Asia, and I've been there many times. I find it endlessly fascinating, and I'll be back in Singapore actually in October next year for a week directing a program out there, and which is what I was doing last time. Japan in particular, though, I've been to Japan like 30, 40 times for work, and sometimes stay longer for pleasure because I just find it fascinating. And I really find it, even though it's one of the more, first time I went there, I was like, this is kind of the most alien to me of all the countries I've been in, just in terms of it's just harder to orient, you
Yeah.
not using the Roman letters, so it's harder to read, et cetera, et cetera. But now I'm actually the most comfortable there than of many other countries that I visited, probably just from
And
growing
which
familiarity.
cities do you spend time when you're in Japan, Adam?
Work almost all in Tokyo.
Okay.
And then as a tourist, I've been to Kyoto as well. Yeah.
Kyoto
Uh,
is sensational.
yeah.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, that's watch this space. Sage has a vanity project of opening up our third office in Kyoto, Japan.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be brilliant.
Well, really cool. I think another thing maybe before I just jump onto the book and the manuscript here is maybe a couple of words about what your work. So I think it will be easy for people to misunderstand where you're situated because it's at an intersection, or maybe it's at a few intersections. But executive education is the term that's most frequently referenced in the snippets in the book where you indicate it. But maybe just a couple words
Yeah.
on, so what you're doing in Tokyo, what you're doing in Singapore,
Yeah.
what you mean by program.
Sure. Well, it's probably about half of what I do is executive education, right? Which
Okay.
working with companies in terms of helping them design programs to help them move their organizational needle forward, to have to develop their people, but and generally that's delivered in a programmatic way. What does that mean? Like people convening for anywhere from one day to, actually, I worked with a group of young high potentials from a company in the Middle East. We were literally together full time for 6 weeks. So, so it can be very long, intensive experiences as well. But overall, like, why do I do what I do? So that's the method. But ultimately, the why is, I do this in order to primarily help humanize the world of work. I think that's the theme, and kind of where, when I'm brought in, whether it's around leadership and culture, or innovation, or developing a leadership community. It's actually helping make our work life a life that's more worth living. And so how do we balance right brain and left brain? How do we balance work and personal purpose? How do we balance KPIs with health and wellness? All those things to more integrate work, rather than there being kind of, this is work, it's 9 to 5 and you earn your daily bread, and then you go and you live doing the things you love with your family. I think those walls are falling down. We can't divide them quite so neatly. So we have to figure out how work is evolving. And the good news is work does evolve. It has evolved over time. The way that we have done work over the last 150 years is a sort of a symptom of the Industrial Revolution. And the reason it stuck as long as it does, because the Industrial Revolution was very successful. So it's hard for us to break those models of how work is supposed to happen, because it kind of works. But capitalism and indeed work has actually a really good strong track record of being able to reinvent itself. And I think we're at the reason we're seeing such low engagement at work right now. If you look at the Gallup, biennial polls, etc., the reason that we're dissatisfied with work is because I think we see the potential of what it could be in a way that's fit for the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Which I think is even beyond the digital age. It's not so much to do with digitalization. As a matter of fact, sometimes I work with companies on digital transformation, and ultimately what you learn is it has very little to do with digitalization and much more to do with how we evolve, how we relate with one another as human beings, and how we innovate around our management model.
Yeah, there was have you, out of curiosity, read the author Bruce Tulgan? Is that somebody you've come across before?
No, I don't think so.
There's some beautiful echoes in your work and his. I think you'd enjoy getting familiar with Bruce, and
Bruce Tulgan. Okay.
yeah, and I'll certainly introduce you if you think it's worthy of a direct introduction.
Thank you.
But there was just a lot of complementary, I think, kind of meditations on certain ideas,
Yeah.
cut from a different cloth, but some real similarities there.
Interesting.
Um, uh, Totally perpendicular here. Why did you open all the chapters with song lyrics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I always loved in general having something before a chapter begins. Sometime, whether it's a quotation or whether it's what a poem. Generally you find those things though in the typical book, be it a poem, be it a song, be it a whatever. It's just at the very beginning of the book. But every now and then you see it at the beginning of every chapter. And I love curating things from the world to say something about what you're about to say. It's in a way like, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, right? And one way in which we communicated with each other when we didn't have the words is we made mixtapes. And so that's probably where that comes from, right? So what's the major theme in this book? How can I describe that if I were making a mixtape? What song would I select?
Well,
I
it
think
was
that's
a
where it comes
truly
from.
mixed mixtape. I got to say, I was trying to see if we could get some kind of character profile from the song selections, but they're all over
That's
the map.
very. If you looked at the song selection on my phone, you'd also see it's very eclectic.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think there's something else that I'll say for folks who will pick the book up or are considering to. You have beautiful diction, and there was just great vocabulary and word choice, and I really appreciated that, because in the category of what we can generally call business books, although I won't say that that's the way you think about your book. There's almost a kind of shaming around some ornamentation in language, and I just wanted to say a quick thank you
That's
for
very
not
kind of you.
being subject to that cloud of shame, and instead just putting some really beautiful sentences together in there.
Oh, thank you. It's very kind. Well, my bachelor's degree, I was an English major, so I do think language matters.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it does. I noticed. Um, so maybe I can get you to jump in this way. Here's a line from what you wrote. This book resembles an executive program in miniature.
Mm.
So, for those who will want to get kind of a précis or an easy entry in,
Mm-hmm.
why is that? Why does it resemble an executive program in miniature?
Because I think a lot of business books that aren't textbooks operate kind of along the lines of case studies. Like, let me tell you the story of this executive or this company. And
Yeah,
that's great. And so clearly I have those stories in the book, but I want people to go away with practical takeaways, things they not only can do, but they have the confidence they can do it. And confidence comes from clarity. Like, oh, okay, I know exactly what I would need to do to make that happen. So for example, one of the chapters in the book is about purpose, because that's the most important thing for Gen Y, what they're looking
yeah.
for from work. And but clearly I would imagine the reader would be going, okay, that's all fine and good, but how do I help my people articulate their purpose? How do I better articulate and live my company's purpose? So I wanted to get very crunchy and specific about what you would have to do in order to do that. So I actually instruct the reader on how you could create a workshop for your people that would do that. So I give them the why, the what, and the how, as if, the reader were on a program with me and I was directing this program and helping them on how you would to lead a workshop on your purpose. So
Yeah.
so it's in that manner, so I'm sort of giving away the techniques that I would use if someone were on a program with me and I was covering those themes. So that the reader can go, oh, okay, now I'm actually more empowered rather than simply inspired. I mean, I hope they would be inspired, but ultimately, I think a business book has to do more. It also has to give you the tools to do something with that inspiration.
Yeah, and I noticed like beyond sort of practical just examples, there is a little bit of almost like injunctions, like go, write
Yeah.
this or
Yeah.
try that or say these words.
Yeah, exactly. Which is like exactly what I would do on a program, So if we covered that a theme with me, probably at the end of the day, I would say, okay, let's pause and just write down, some key takeaways for yourself. And why don't you consider doing this before you, go home? So yes, in many ways, it's almost as if I'm thinking of the reader as, a participant on an executive program sitting across from me.
Mhm. Well, with that as like a backdrop, who did you feel you were writing it for? Because there could
Yeah,
be there could be a range of stakeholders, right? And I don't mean to
absolutely.
the exclusion of somebody else, but did you have someone in mind?
Well, yeah, many people have asked me that. And actually, I think it's I have to answer quite broadly. I think it's probably anyone who is responsible for other people in a professional context. I think
Right.
the most useful person is anyone who manages others, because it would be helping that manager to, help your people with their, with their inspiration, with their purpose, with their culture, how you should reconsider the development conversation you have with them, et cetera. So I think that's probably the most useful. But I think it's useful for anyone also who just aspires to management, which is, many people. So because the theme, I'm granted, the themes I'm covering are very universal, very broad, and so
Yeah.
therefore it's a very wide net in terms of who the potential reader would be.
There's something I feel like with the conversation around like who is this mysterious generation coming after and their, strange ways. That almost seems to have an equal level of appeal as like men are from Mars and women are from Venus,
Mhm.
like just an eternal interest in how to crack
Yeah,
this exotic and mysterious species.
that's
In
right.
so much of your book is I feel like dedicated to interpreting behavior or
Mm.
that's mysterious.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what I mentioned before in terms of maybe why I originally was interested in this topic, is that companies, HR directors, when they were sending these 20 something people onto my program, were saying, can you fix them? So like they clearly just all of a sudden didn't understand them. Like all the models and ways in which they thought they could manage people didn't seem to apply quite so well. And they were hoping that I could sculpt them in order to suit the management style of the leader. Whereas actually, great leadership is empathy for the other person and thinking about what they require from me in this moment, right? That's what adaptive leadership is all about. So actually, it's the other way around. So yes, absolutely, I'm trying to kind of reveal this mysterious creature, so that, and then ultimately, what would happen is, I hope that would evolve our management model. And as we evolve our management model, we evolve our world of work. So actually, but if understanding Gen Y is to peer into the future of work, because ultimately they're assuming leadership positions in their own right, which means and they're going to be leading their organizations in the way they always wish they had been led. And we used to be able to dismiss this group, or just sort of, I don't understand them, or whatever it might be, because they were a small group when they were just entering the workforce, say, 20 years ago. But now Gen Y compose 65% of the global workforce. In 3 short years, they will compose 75% of the global workforce. So this is an undeniable, can't be ignored, um, demographic in the workforce, that is now dominant. So, it's not like this marginal group and, well, I don't understand them, but it's fine. Like somehow they'll go away. And of course, with every Gen Y entering the workforce, you have a baby boomer retiring the workforce. So the percent of the workforce composed of millennials has exponentially increased over the last few years. There's been this accelerant, because it used to be this huge mass of baby boomers, tiny group of Gen X, the sandwich generation, and a huge group of Gen Ys. But that's not true anymore. Now, when I'm speaking to audiences on this topic, first question I ask is raise your hand if you're a baby boomer, raise your hand if you're Gen X, raise your hand if you're Gen Y, et cetera. And the vast majority of people in the room are now Gen X and Y. Fewer and fewer baby boomers are in the room.
There's I think there's quite an effective description that you have given around the slightly slippery science of generation measurement, and the fact that those boundary lines have to be flexible, and you can really get variation very quickly if you just change one or two factors.
Right.
But still, maybe I can sort of try on a kind of devil's advocate position, which in some ways is a shallow objection, Adam, but in some other ways, I think it maybe touches on something people would like to know if they're leading a company trying to figure out what the future of that organization looks like culturally. What's the difference between, say, Gen Y and Gen Y mysterious exotic behavior of these creatures, and just youth? So when a Gen Y, evincing all the like funny behaviors that they do, suddenly is 55 with 2 kids and 20 years of management experience under their belt, won't they just basically have the same moorings and tenor as today's baby boomer?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I get it all the time. So it's a very valid question, and it's it's the life stage question, right? Surely, as people get older, develop experience, or get married, or have children, then they will adapt, they will change, they'll evolve, and give them 30 years, and a millennial will be a baby boomer. Is basically the argument. Actually, generational scholars who study generations shows that that's not the case. Now, I'm not saying that people's how they view work, doesn't evolve with life stage. I'm not saying that's inconsequential, but the primary paradigms that we have in terms of how we approach life and work, et cetera, are based on the context that we were in our formative years. So, when you were growing up, what were the parenting paradigms at that time? Clearly parenting has not been the same, from century to century, or even 50-year block to 50-year block, et cetera. Economically, was it a period of want or a period of surplus? Politically, was it a period of stability or a period of rebellion, revolution, or even conflict? In terms of your first work experience, what we also find is that often how people view work, even decades later, that the seminal paradigm they hold about work is based on their very first work experience.
Wow.
Which for many people was like, you were a paper boy, or you were a waiter, or you tended a bar in a pub, or whatever that might be. Like, even though now, like 30 years later, you do something completely different and you're a mega executive, but how you think about work was based on those moments. And it makes sense, right? If you think about, like, how do we think about playing a sport, you probably have to go back to your very first memories you had about playing a sport, and think about how much that influences you even today. And often the way people think about management or being led, having a manager, is again often how that's colored is by the very first manager that you had. Now, yes, we are, as human beings, we're adaptable and we are capable of adaptation, and we do. But still, there are some foundational paradigms, even if they're implicit, that kind of rest in our consciousness or subconsciousness. So that is why generational theory is valid. But the reason that generational theory can be unduly discarded is because people say, well, I can think of an example where that isn't, what you just said isn't true. Like you've
Yes.
just characterized Gen Y in this manner. Well, my daughter isn't like that, so everything you're saying is rubbish. Well, of course, when you talk about generations, you are generalizing. And I say that, at the beginning of any keynote speech I give on this topic. What I'm about to say is not going to apply to every single human being on this planet. But if, as leaders, if we want to lead our people better, it is useful, isn't it, to understand some things that are broadly true, not always true, broadly true. That doesn't replace the fact that you have to understand people as individuals.
Yes. We're gonna see some, I'm sure, some really remarkable stuff around the fact that COVID and its attendant trappings, such as being recruited into a job that you work in for 24 months before you've met anybody in the flesh.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or students whose formative, they went from grade 9 into high school, say in grade 10, and all of grade 10 and 11 and the bulk of 12 was outside a classroom.
It was virtual. Yeah.
And I think maybe, Adam, in addition, I can't think of another thing that was global, right? So a kid growing up in Oslo and Warsaw and Wilmington and Delhi all had that experience.
The same experience. Yeah, that's very true.
It's going to be interesting, that one.
Yeah, for sure. I guess the only other thing I could think of that you could say kind of a whole generation would have in common was simply being digital native. Like that's something.
Oh yes, right.
That the majority, of the world. Yes, there are going to be exceptions, particularly in evolving economies, but something that people have in common. What that also means is that both the COVID example you gave and simply the ubiquity of technology and digital connectivity means that the other objection that I sometimes hear is that, well, surely it's different. A generation, how you define a generation is different in China versus Argentina. And that's true, of course, because again, the context, go back to my argument, the context defines a generation. And when there are different contexts, then that will define the generation differently. However, because Gen Y and of course Gen Z and future generations have grown up with global digital connectivity, they share in their ubiquitous communications all over the world they start to share more common paradigms.
Yes.
So actually the regional or country distinctions between generations that would have been true or are true for Gen X, for baby boomers, et cetera, are less true for Gen Ys and millennials and for future generations.
Do you have children?
I do not. I'm married, but I don't have children.
I was thinking, how many generations of Kingls can study generations of the world?
It could be a family business, right?
Yeah, exactly right.
We went a slightly different way. My nephew, I only have one niece and one nephew as well, a very small family. My nephew has actually gone into media and entertainment. So my family, my future generations have gone the way of my first career versus my second.
One of the big themes here that I just think the folks that are part of our community and will be the first listeners to this will care about is your entire treatment of portfolio careers. So for the uninitiated, can you just kind of wade into those waters, what a portfolio career is and sort of what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you think about careers, if you go back just a couple decades, really, the idea is that a life was composed of 3 stages. It was schooling, career, retirement. And generally career, the way you define career would be you were doing one job for one company at a time. And if you just go back 2 generations to my grandparents, it was in many cases the same employer for your entire working career. My 2 grandfathers each had the same employer their whole careers. And one of my grandfathers had the same job with the same employer his entire career. And that was common. the idea of there's a whole phrase around this. The IBM had it they called it the company man. Sexist phrase now, but back then was probably more true in that most of their employees were men, right? Company man meant, you join IBM straight out of college and you work there until you retire.
Mm.
So the paradigm was, and of course it was also, for my generation, Gen X, I know when I was coming out of college and people were looking for jobs, that was a very dear decision you were about to make, what employer you would join, because we knew that it would be a stain on your CV if you were then to leave that employer, with with fewer than 8 or 9 years, right? No one would have hired you because you would be disloyal. You would be, that person worked for this company for just 5 years. Don't even interview them. Today, of course, if you follow that criterion, if you follow that criterion, you wouldn't be able to interview anyone. If you said, don't interview anyone who has, fewer than 8 years with any employer, there's no way you would be able to interview anyone, at least not among Gen Y. And so some things have changed in terms of loyalty to the employer. And part of that is because employers, but part of it is employers have demonstrated that they aren't particularly loyal to the employee anymore. Think about the Great Recession, right? And the massive layoffs. Again, generation is defined by the paradigms in which they were raised. What happened to Gen Y as they were entering the workforce? Great Recession, layoffs, no jobs, pension plans decimated. And either that was happening to them or was happening to their parents or their older siblings. What's the lesson? You have to rely on yourself. Can't rely on your employer to look after you for life. So they're simply responding to the environment in which they found themselves in those seminal moments, those first jobs that they had, which is like, well, I have to make sure that I am creating a career for myself instead of saying my employer will create my career for me. So what happened? Well, portfolio career used to be something that you did as you were nearing or at retirement, right? So baby boomers actually started using the phrase portfolio career, meaning as they retired from being that IBM company man, they're like, okay, now I will, in my twilight years, I don't just want to play golf all the time. What some people said is, so I'll be an NED for this company and I'll, do a half a day per week with this charity. And I'll, work at my local food bank, and maybe I'll be a tutor for kids with math because I love math, whatever. That's a portfolio career, right? Now you're doing lots of things, spending a little bit of each week doing those things. So that's what we mean with portfolio career. The interesting thing is, though, that now Gen Y are pursuing portfolio careers at the beginning and mid-career rather than just that's something you do at the end. So in many ways, Gen Y, the way a Gen Y is thinking about how they're creating their job is much like a baby boomer right now. Part of that is because employers aren't hiring or haven't been hiring. That changed over the last few years. I think we're going back now as we're entering recession in many parts of the world. And also, they're thinking, well, isn't there more development to be had? Isn't there more fun to be had? Isn't there more variety to be had if I can work in a number of different contexts? So they're embracing, and also the gig economy have helped create this paradigm, right? 0 hours contracts and so on. And also something like 70% of the world's work is composed of projects. And so even employers are twigging, well, if almost everything we're doing is a project, then why don't we hire people on a project by project basis instead of just, having people on our payroll indefinitely? And so Gen Ys are leaning into that as well, and saying, okay, well then I'll work with this company for a year and I'll do that project, and then I'll go on and I'll do something else. And actually, in many ways, what they're observing is that's a way in to accelerate your professional development. Because what a lot of employers have done historically is they've said, okay, well, we'll give you this development opportunity once you've worked here for 5 years. We'll give you that development opportunity once you've worked here for 10 years. So in other words, development is a reward for tenure instead of helping people self-realize and become more of the person that they want to be in terms of their development as a manager, as a leader, as a professional, as an expert. So the Gen Y is saying, okay, well then instead of that model, I'll work with this company and I'll get that development there. And then I'll go work with this company and I'll get that development there. In fact, I'll work with 3 companies right now and I'll get all the development I want to have with all those different companies, rather than that one other working with that one company who said, well, I will get that in 8 years' time. So, and of course, also the other thing that's creating the portfolio career is that there's less loyalty to the company, a given company, because pensions just aren't what they used to be. Right, with the evolution of the pension plan from the defined benefit or final salary scheme to the defined contribution scheme, employees are going, well, I can move around with great rapidity and frequency because I don't have the golden handcuffs of saying, if I just hang on and stay with this company for 10 more years, my final salary pension will be amazing. You don't have that anymore. You've got this rucksack of investments, and you can carry that around from employer to employer. So all these different things have happened in our environment on a macro level, and in terms of even how employers have responded to their environment. And all we're seeing is employees, particularly Gen Y employees, going, okay, so that's the way, if that's the way you're setting up the game, then I'm going to play the game differently in order to maximize my own reward or realization or development. Why would companies think, if the game has changed, that, you know, employees would respond the same way they did 30 years ago? It's foolish.
How fast does the game change?
Very fast now. Very fast. I think things are happening faster than ever. You know, when I talk about themes like change and adaptability, it's a different conversation than I was having even 15 years ago. 15 years ago, people were going, the world is VUCA. Let me explain VUCA. And then we go through the acronym and everyone nods sagely, et cetera, et cetera. But actually now I would say, all I'd say is the world is more VUCA than it used to be. So actually, let's stop talking about change and say the delta of change is increasing itself. So change itself is increasing. Change is constant. Not like we're in moments of precipitous change, which used to be the case. Change used to be sporadic. It used to be sort of chapters in the book. But when the world has change all the time, then again, both companies and employees respond differently. And that's what we're starting to see, is this fluid adaptation and evolution of how we do work. So change is becoming reflexive and autonomic, rather than, well, I'll do this, and then in 10 years, I'll probably have to change. Sort of, I kind of always have to be thinking about how I'm evolving and changing almost moment to moment.
Yeah. One of my real points of kind of validation, because I think maybe it's because from personal experience, I saw a bit of this, and as an employee and as an employer, was you have a section, Adam, on co-creating job descriptions.
Yeah.
It comes quickly, and it could get glazed over by, I think, some readers, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just kind of give you a nice little frame so you can talk about that, because I think that's very important. In particular, you know, a lot of the work that we do is thinking about sales and a commercial mindset for people in professional services. So think lawyers, accountants, specialty consultants, and so forth, and the way in which they're just going to bring money in. Those organizations don't have anybody with the title sales, but so it's just kind of senior folks. But there's a lot of trepidation, and people don't know quite how to navigate the conversation around, say, hey, let's bring Joe over into the partnership, and it'd be nice if Joe carries the freight in terms of, you know, bringing some clients through the door. Right. And to some extent, depending on the business, it happens at a younger level too. The co-created job description is just absolutely, you know, in my mind, the only way to have an adult conversation around that kind of thing, where both parties can either agree or disagree without sort of losing face and so forth.
Yeah.
Can I just get you to riff on this idea a bit?
Sure. You know, well, of course, we know every human being is distinct, right? Unique, has their own background, their own skills, strengths, etc. And yet we bring them into our organization and we say we value diversity, we hire for diversity, and then we try to kind of cookie cutter everyone. I don't like the phrase. A lot of companies say we're very good at D and I, but actually I think most companies are fairly good at D and pretty crap at I. And the reason for that is D is a relatively simple process. You can improve D by recruiting. Change a policy for how you recruit, and you can inject more diversity in your workforce. And companies, generally being large, complex bureaucracies, are very good at creating and implementing new policies. Companies are very bad at inclusion because that is a cultural imperative, right? How people relate to one another. That's hard work. And that's requiring people to adapt and recognize that someone coming into a role is not going to approach that role in exactly the same way as their predecessor. So let's embrace that. And let's think about how do we help people maximize their strengths. An organization that's really good at this is Ove Arup. You're talking about professional services, right? The architectural engineering consulting firm. They've done some of the most remarkable buildings on the planet, including the Sydney Opera House. What they say is, in terms of job creation and creating like objectives is, if there are 5 objectives on your annual like list of KPIs, we want you to help us define the 5th, because there's always going to be something you don't quite capture on a list. We've all been there, right? You create someone's objectives. There's always something that's just not quite there that you'd want them to explore or to pursue or to achieve, and you just can't quite define it. Well, then have them define it. Help them to define their role. Because also, of course, people who are particularly in sales, who are at the coal face of the company and are responsible for its success, are going to see things well before management see it. So again, let them tell you then, if this was one of my objectives, I would be able to help us earn more money. Or if you could let me pursue this, we will earn more money, right? I would rather listen to that than rely on the wisdom of people using, precedents from decades ago. That's the problem with senior leaders creating objectives for people, particularly who are customer facing. Because that very senior person is, speaking of paradigms, is relying on paradigms of the market that they had when they were in those roles like 25 years ago. And so we're not evolving fast enough then in terms of what do our people need to be doing? How do we need to be incentivizing them? How do they need to be defining their role? So that's the first point. The second point is going back to my point about people are individuals and you want people to be world class. It's okay if even people with the same title will pursue their role in a slightly different way in many cases, particularly in professional services, I think. I think that's an advantage, not a disadvantage. And think of it this way, right? If I help people to define their role and maximize their strengths and pursue either that market segment or that industry or that function that they're really comfortable in or really expert in, and want to pursue it in a way that that they would find best based on their experience, hopefully they're going to become world class at that thing, rather than they're going, well, I'm not comfortable doing that, but I'll do it in the way you tell me to do it. And then maybe in a few years, I'll evolve and I'll get better and I'll move from poor to mediocre. I would rather help people define their role and be world class quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's such wisdom in that, and maybe just a lot of additional territory to explore around there, including breaking off potential hires, because you can see maybe in the way that they try to co-create, this is going to be a terrible match, right? Yeah. So the positive cases, the negative cases, which are ultimately positive because they kill something that shouldn't come to life, in terms of a wrong fit. Yeah, it's such a great observation, and I think almost a small little micro picture of this idea of adaptation between
Yeah.
Between people in an asymmetric relationship. It's like, I've got a
Right.
job for you and some
Yeah.
money for you. Let's see if you fit my 1 by 1 by 1 cube.
Right. Yeah.
And then you see if you can't wrench yourself into
That's right.
those dimensions.
That's right. Yeah.
It's like
And
a
you hear it
picture
all
of
the time.
energy.
You hear it all the time. Someone going, why don't we do ABC? Response, oh, that's not the way we do things around here. Well, that's not even an answer. And yet, for many companies, that's sufficient.
I thought, well, another related idea, which I've seen LinkedIn at some point achieve, is this idea of badging, badging your portfolio career, this sort of moment with projects. So there's some really nice set of solutions suggesting itself in things you're writing about. If somebody comes and is hired for a project and they're seeing their career on a portfolio basis and they just kind of want to get the badge, well, for God's sake, let's do up just a gorgeous, well-designed little badge, call it something amazing, thank them for their time and bring,
Totally
play
agree.
into their hands, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then the great thing too is if you find, you maybe think, well, we want to find great people and keep them. Okay, well, let's assume you can't keep them. So what do you have to do? You have to create an environment that's so attractive for them that you'll be able to work with them multiple times. May not be over 10 years consecutively, but maybe you'll work with them for a year on this project. And then 6 months later, they'll come back and they'll work for you for another year, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you are leveraging, your ability to attract top talent. It's just in a different way.
Yeah, I had a hard time listening to that piece of advice because I think it was sort of personal to me. The idea like you just can't keep them, but it's such a valuable exercise saying, let's start with the premise that you can't, then what?
Yeah. Hewlett Packard, I think, I went through that kind of collective evolution in their thinking. And the way my understanding is the way in which they talk to their new recruits now is that they say, we know you're probably not going to be here for your whole career. We'd love for you to stay as long as possible. We know you're probably not going to stay. So our job, Hewlett Packard's job, is to develop you, help make you more employable, develop your skills, help you kind of self-realize, be the professional you want to be. And then maybe, just maybe, even if you leave us, you'll consider coming back someday. Which is a very different conversation, right? Than companies. So many companies still assume, oh, well, once we hire you, you'll be here for life, despite all the evidence which tells them that is not going to be the case.
Yes, and that if people leave, it's because we've done something wrong.
Yeah.
When maybe
not necessarily.
cast, it's like
right.
There was literally not one thing you could do to keep them.
Right. Yeah, that's right. I've interviewed many Gen Ys who've said, I said, why did you leave that company? In many cases, they say just that. It's like, there's no particular reason. It's like, I kind of felt I did what I wanted to do there. And now I'm kind of curious about what else is out there. And then there's nothing that company probably could have done. And you know what? Going back to your industry, that's particularly threatening, existentially threatening to professional services, particularly those who have partner models. Because this is completely disintermediating the partnership model. If people are just not going to stay from graduate to partner, because their whole model is predicated on that happening, on longevity, on loyalty, on completely giving yourself over to the organization's needs. And so don't tell me that isn't happening either, of course, because I speak to law firms, partner models, and they're like, we are panicking now that we don't think we can survive if we continue in this way.
Yeah, I mean, so our business's focus is building academies for organizations that need and want them. And when I look at it and try to ascertain, like, well, what's at root there? There's a few things, but one of the things is institutional knowledge. So in something like a law firm, there's a tremendous amount that is not kept on data systems, including just like deep cultural instinct around how to deal with this type of client and, which types of events lead to what kinds of matters that can be commercially, you know, lucrative and so on. There's all kinds of stuff that's very hard to just save in a CRM or something like that,
Yeah.
even if you had kind of compliant behavior there, which you don't.
Yes.
Institutional knowledge just walks out the door when the people do.
Yeah.
And so it's such a tough time to figure out, well, which pieces of these are going to change and which aren't.
Yeah.
And if you have something as sort of cleverly thought out and built over such a long period as the partnership model,
yeah,
you can't just supplant it straight away without some cost.
Agreed. Yeah. It's tricky, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And of course, the partners are completely incentivized to try to protect the status quo.
Yes.
So they worked so hard to get there, right?
Sure. Sure.
So
it's like you had quite a eloquent section on pension schemes, and there's something similar in the structure there.
Yeah.
Adam, holy smokes, an hour just absolutely tore by.
I see that. Yeah. Time flies when you're having fun.
Great wisdom in this book. Delightful read. It really, I think it's kind of like buying 3 to 4 books. We're gonna let people know about it.
Thank you so much.
That's it. I hope that sort of shows up. There it is. How should people find you? How would you like people to track you down, buy the book, read the other things that you write, or hear what you say, or get you to speak, and so forth?
Well, the book, is available on pretty much any good retailer near you or online. And then to find me and more of my writing, speaking, etc., I have a website, which is just my name, adamkingl.com. And that has pretty much everything just about everything I've ever produced: articles, podcasts, some webinars that are public, you name it. There's lots on there. Including some, little previews about my next book. So that's certainly, and people can contact me directly via that website as well.